Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Warren Harding, and the focus is the dark horse from Ohio. The year is 1919, and in that year, Warren Harding, as a United States Senator, was part of the vote to vote down Woodrow Wilson's negotiated Treaty of Versailles, which included the Covenant to the League of Nations, and Woodrow Wilson was convinced that the people would respond in the 1920 election and send Democrats to Washington and revive the League. But the question then became, who was going to run? Who was going to run for the Republicans? And a lot of people thought it was going to be Theodore Roosevelt. The former president who had kind of broken the party in 1912 was now back in the fold. He had been outspoken opposition to Wilson over these last several years, and a lot of people thought it was time to put Roosevelt back in the White House. But Roosevelt died January of 1919, and that left things wide open. One of those wanting Warren Harding to toss his hat in the ring was Harry Daugherty, the man who was often pushing Harding to run for large offices, and Harding wasn't sure that he really wanted this. He was acknowledging the fact that, sure, 6 of the last 10 presidents had come from Ohio, and as Harry Daugherty told him, look, you're the favorite son of Ohio right now, let's get you in the mix and see if we can get you the presidency. But Harding confided to a bunch of folks in private letters that he really didn't want this. And one of them, he said, honestly, I would not have the presidency if I could reach out and grasp it. I find it difficult to make a good many people believe that one can feel this way. Of course, I'm human enough to enjoy having friends who think well enough of me to suggest me for the position, but when it comes down to serious consideration, I am wholly truthful when I say that I'd rather no mention were made whatever. It was going to be a lot of work to be president, a lot of hard work, always criticized, there were no breaks. Why would anybody sort of want this? It's part of what Warren Harding is thinking, and similar was Florence Harding. She said so to Harry Daugherty, that look, we're happy in our home in Washington. He likes the Senate. I like being a senator's wife. There's no strain, no pressure, no nerve-wracking anxieties. We have charming friends. Warren is making a fine record. He can stay here as long as he likes. Why should they jeopardize that? Well, Harry Daugherty kept pushing. In fact, he and Harding had a little bit of a rift going through all of this, but Daugherty kept going, and he got the Ohio delegation of Congress to commit to Warren Harding as the favorite son, to get Ohio's delegates to go to the convention, and he also got Florence Harding on board, and by December 17th of 1919, Warren Harding said, okay, Harry, I'll put my hat in the ring. Now, the major themes for Harding's campaign, America first, that had always been sort of part of his political repertoire, and something he called the return to normalcy, kind of a reaction to the chaos of these last several years of the Wilson administration. One of his first speeches of the campaign to the Ohio Club of New York, January of 1920, and this was all about America first. I have confidence in our America that requires no counsel of foreign powers to point the way of American duty. We wish to counsel, cooperate, and contribute. But we arrogate to ourselves the keeping of the American conscience and every concept of our moral obligations. This is very much against Wilson's League of Nations. Call it the selfishness of nationality if you will. I think it is an inspiration of patriotic devotion to safeguard America first, to stabilize America first, to prosper America first, to think of America first, to exalt America first, to live for and revere America first. Can't get much more America first than that. What about return to normalcy? What did Harding mean about that? Well, in one case he said, by normalcy, I don't mean the old order, but a regular, steady order of things. I mean normal procedure, the natural way without excess. I don't believe the old order can or should come back, but we must have normal order, or I have said, normalcy. Not exactly clear what that meant, but it did mean some of this. Less progressive, less sort of reform-oriented, more conservative, less international engagement, more nationalistic focus. These were part of the themes for Warren Harding. Now, Harding was by far not the front runner for the Republican nomination. There were really 3 in the running for that. General Leonard Wood, he was kind of the Roosevelt candidate. He was Roosevelt's longtime friend, a Medal of Honor winner who had been a commander, Roosevelt's commander in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, former Army Chief of Staff. He was probably the leader going into the convention. Then you've got Illinois Governor Frank Lowden, a former member of the House, who spent 5 years on the Republican National Committee. He was a shot. And Hiram Johnson. Now, Johnson was the leading progressive. The progressives very much back in the Republican camp. The former governor of California, though, had broken with the Republicans over the last 2 cycles. And there were a lot of the old guard conservatives who weren't very happy with Johnson, even though he wanted the nomination to get back in. How to get that nomination? Well, Warren Harding had something that Harry Daugherty said was this is how it was going to happen. Daugherty told the New York Times early in the campaign that I don't expect Senator Harding to be nominated on the first, second, or third ballots. But I think we can afford to take chances that at about 11 minutes after 2 Friday morning of the convention, when 10 or 20 weary men are sitting around a table, someone will say, who will we nominate? At that decisive time, the friends of Harding will suggest him and can well afford to abide by the result. And this is kind of what happened. Now, many states at this point in presidential election history had adopted primaries to select their delegates to go to the national convention. And for the Republicans, it was Wood that was actually entering more primaries than anybody else, including the one in Ohio. Now, Harding wasn't very happy about this. He thought he'd at least have all the delegates from his own state, but it wasn't to be. Wood actually captured 9 of the 39 delegates from Ohio, and Warren Harding was pretty depressed about this, and then it got even worse as Harry Daugherty got him signed up for 2 other primaries, one in Indiana and the other in Montana. And in Montana, Warren Harding got 723 votes out of 40,000 cast. I mean, basically a blip, almost non-existent. And he thought the whole thing was over. He wanted to drop out. Enough of this. He has no chance. Well, both Warren Harding and whether Florence Harding and Harry Daugherty said none of that. You're not dropping out. At least you're going to go to the convention. But Harding his heart really was not in this. But there was some bad news for the other candidates as well. First of all, for General Wood, Louis Seibold, a reporter for the New York World, broke a story that Wood had spent a whopping $1.8 million so far in his campaign, almost entirely from a handful of millionaires who had given him that money. And this was way more than anybody else. It started a congressional investigation. Some of Johnson's supporters were pushing Congress to kind of look into this. They came out with this report, and it didn't look good for Wood that he was basically bought and sold by these millionaires, and he was going to have to do their bidding if he wins the presidency. Well, what about Lowden? He had spent $414,000. Most of that was his own money, but he was also sort of rumored to be trying to buy delegates with some cash, a couple of them, to vote for him at the convention. So there was a little bit of a taint there related to money as well. And of course, Johnson had still a lot of baggage. The old guard did not like him from the breaks of the progressives over the last couple of campaigns. So yes, these were the 3 frontrunners, but they all had some baggage. They all showed up in Chicago of June of 1920, and Warren Harding was not himself. He was depressed. He thought he had no chance. He had not done well in the primaries. He only had a handful of delegates. Frankly, he was more interested in making sure his friend George Harris, who was in Columbus, Ohio, was going to get his declaration of candidacy for the Senate done in time so he could at least have a fallback plan to rerun for the U.S. Senate. Now, Harry Daugherty wasn't happy about this. He thought it would send a terrible signal to his presidential supporters if he was also registering to run for the Senate. But look, Harding wasn't going to go all in on the presidency yet. He needed to have a backup plan because he really didn't see a path to getting those 471 delegates, which is what you needed for a majority at the convention, to get him the nomination. Well, putting him into nomination was Frank Willis, the governor of Ohio. Officially nominated Warren Harding, and then they started to take the initial votes. This is now Friday, June 11th. It is sweltering, about 100 degrees inside the Chicago Coliseum, and they started voting. Wood jumped out on top in the first ballot, 287.5 votes, still far short of a majority. You had Lowden in second place at 211.5, Johnson at kind of a distant third at 133.5. Where was Warren Harding? Sixth place. 65.5 votes. It took 3 more ballots, kind of little movement in that day. They recessed for the day. And again, Warren Harding was depressed. He kind of wanted out of this. But that's when those smoke-filled rooms started to happen. And smoke-filled rooms were taking place where people were gathering. How do we break this deadlock at the top across Chicago? And the main smoke-filled room that Harry Daugherty had predicted took place at the Blackstone Hotel in the suite of Will Hayes, who was the chair of the Republican Committee. And in this room were a bunch of U.S. senators, the Republicans of Henry Cabot Lodge, Charles Curtis, Reed Smoot from Utah, Frank Brandegee from Connecticut, and then a newsman, George Harvey, a former Democrat, now a strong supporter of the Republicans because he hated Woodrow Wilson. Every option was on the table as these senators bounced ideas back and forth. What about a Wood-Lowden combination, or a Lowden-Wood combination, or Wood-Johnson, Lowden-Johnson? But there was nobody who was actually going to support these combinations. None of the 3 candidates were interested in playing second banana to any of the rest. And they were all problematic still and didn't seem like any of them were actually going to break through. So who could they go with? As Harry Daugherty predicted, Why not Warren Harding? Where did Harding stand? Well, in 1912, he had stayed loyal to the old guard part of the party. He didn't join the progressives. That was good. He was always a very loyal vote for the Republican Party in the United States Senate. He was for the League of Nations, but only with the reservations, and that was key to Lodge and others now in the party. He was the complete opposite of Wilson, who's that pompous and elitist academic, and Harding very much sort of just plain folks, as he was called. Very different, so that was a positive. Plus, he was from Ohio, which again had something going for it. So there were discussions, and people basically came out with the rumors that if neither Wood nor Lowden could break through the next morning, these senators would start pushing votes in favor of Warren Harding. Now, Harding heard about this. He was brought into it in the wee hours of the morning, and he was a changed man the next day. All of a sudden, he's everybody's friend, old self, smiles and handshakes, slapping backs, but still had to wait and see what happened. Sure enough, on the initial ballots on that Saturday morning, there wasn't a lot of change. You still had Wood and Lowden kind of jockeying at the top. But after that 6th ballot and 7th ballot, it was clear that they were not going to break free. And Warren Harding kept creeping up in each of those ballots. Things really changed then on the 9th, when Warren Harding actually took the lead, this dark horse from Ohio being the other choice of the party. And he went over the top on the 10th ballot to become the nominee for the Republican Party. Vice President, Governor of Massachusetts, Calvin Coolidge, got the nod on the first ballot for the VP. So why did Harding get this nomination? Well, Senator Brandegee said, well, there ain't any first-raters this year. This ain't 1880 or any 1904. We haven't any John Shermans or Theodore Roosevelts. We got a lot of second-raters, and Warren Harding is the best of the second-raters. Interesting comment from that senator. But what about Harding? What did he say? Well, other fellows just as competent as I, or more so, had made enemies, and it looked to me that there was no one in sight that the convention could unite on except myself. So being everyone's friend, exactly as Harry Daugherty had predicted, seemed to make the difference. This was going to be an all-Ohio race because Ohio Governor, the Democrat James Cox, was nominated by his party with an up-and-comer from New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as his VP nominee, and this was going to be a clear choice for the electorate because Cox and Roosevelt were completely aligned with Woodrow Wilson around his League of Nations, and they barnstormed the country advocating the joining of the League as a centerpiece of their campaign. Well, Harding did not travel around the country. He went back home to Marion, Ohio. He wanted to do a front porch campaign like William McKinley had done in Ohio. In fact, Warren Harding had traveled to Canton to visit with McKinley when he had his front porch campaign, and this is exactly the kind of campaign that Warren Harding wanted. America first. Go for the high tariff, low taxes, no League of Nations without reservations. He had his principles, but again, he had his personality as well, which was a big selling point for all the people who came to Marion. On July the 22nd, he formally accepted the nomination and spent the next couple of months hosting about 600,000 people who came to hear him speak from his front porch of his home. Entire Marion, Ohio came out, rolled out that red carpet, the bands, the songs, everybody pitched in, and the star of all of this was Warren Harding. His speeches on the front porch, he was personable, people liked him, he didn't make any gaffes. There was really only one hiccup during the campaign. This came from William Chandler, a professor at Worcester College in Ohio. He had been spending time in Blooming Grove, where Warren Harding had been born, and those rumors of mixed race background, black blood in the line of the Harding family, were rumors that he captured, and eventually they found its way during the campaign into a book. Now, fortunately, most of the reporters nationally ignored this story because, again, it was not substantiated. Most of the Democrats, certainly the candidates, ignored this story. It got out there a little bit. Warren Harding was really angry about this. He wanted to say something, but he was advised properly to just let it go. People will ignore this, which they did, but still, they could not get those rumors to go away. Warren Harding spent his 55th birthday voting for himself for President of the United States. It was his birthday, he went and played golf, and actually it was a really easy night because election went in a landslide for Warren Harding. He captured the Electoral College over Cox 404 to 127, 37 states to only 11 for Cox, a 7 million vote difference in the popular vote. Warren Harding got 60.4% of the popular vote. Cox had only 34% of the popular vote. This was a complete landslide. Large Republican majorities would be going into both houses of Congress as well. Now, this was a big victory for Warren Harding, but let's face it, it was also a complete repudiation of the policies of Woodrow Wilson. Much of that was on the ballot. This return to normalcy was for Harding, but again, a repudiation of the Wilson years, at least the last couple of years. On election night, a lot of the local people from Marion came to Harding's home, and he addressed them and said, look, you and I have been associated together for many years. I know you and you know me. I'm about to be called to a position of great responsibility. I've been on the square with you, and I want to be on the square with all the world. Sure enough, he was about to be the 29th President of the United States. But that's the story for another day. That is Warren Harding, the dark horse from Ohio, from the life of Warren Harding. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.